Hi, my name is Emma Iden. I am the Education Programs Coordinator for the Winnebago Area Literacy Council. Today I'm going to talk to you about ELL tutor training, the basics. So this is going to be a really good training if you are just starting out as a tutor, or if you've been tutoring with us for a while and would just like a refresher, as education is always changing. So that is what we're going to talk about today. We're actually going to start with a video about cultural diversity in communication. This is going to talk a little bit more about kind of in the workplace, but it's really good reminders about how communication is very diverse. And so even just kind of starting out a new relationship with a tutoring pair is so important, especially when we want to make those valuable connections. So I'm going to play this video and then we will continue. So let's take a look.
Cultural diversity is about accepting and respecting people's differences. After all, in order to communicate effectively, you need to understand your audience and deliver your message in a way that will make the most sense to your audience. So, when the audience is culturally diverse, the challenge is to understand their differences and be sensitive to how your message will be received. Let's explain 4 ways to communicate better in today's diverse workplace. 1. Keep your language clear and simple, as you may not share the same first language. Avoid jargon, slang terms, and colloquial expressions. 2. Different cultures have different non-verbal forms of communication. So, make sure that you are not ignorant of differences in body language. For example, consider personal space and touching habits of different cultures. Consider how appropriate handshaking, embraces, or direct eye contact is. 3. To make sure that you understand perfectly well, paraphrase or repeat what you hear. This will minimize misunderstandings. 4. Be open and inclusive of other cultures by getting to know colleagues from different cultural backgrounds. This will help build relationships. As you get to know their cultures better, you will also communicate more effectively with colleagues. Communicating effectively in a culturally diverse environment requires tact and sensitivity. So, the better you know other cultures, the more effectively you can communicate in a diverse workplace.
Okay, so let's kind of talk about then some design, when you're designing an effective tutoring session and then actually implementing it. So I always recommend that we start a lesson with a warm-up. Now this is a great way to kind of loosen up the conversation, hook the learner, and kind of activate that prior knowledge. So I'm going to give some examples on the next slide of what that can look like. Next, we want to review. So this is kind of like completed as an authentic task. This can take as much time as needed. So the last kind of session that you guys were working on, you are able to kind of take some of that information and review it, because that is how we are going to cement these new ideas in our head, especially as adults. So we want to do that. This can be, we can use props, we can use pictures, flashcards, whatever is going to help us review that information that we learned last time. Then we want to present some new materials, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about this later as well in the training, but we're going to look at the difference between direct and discovery when we are presenting new materials to our learners. And then finally, we're going to take a look at structured practice, and this is going to assist the learner with targeted information while providing practice for them. So taking those new concepts or new vocabulary words and actually using them in a meaningful way. And now finally, we have assessment and wrap up. And this can be as simple as asking yourself, did the learner demonstrate the lesson's objectives? And I'm also going to, in a little bit, show you kind of a lesson plan that we have here and just kind of show you how you can use that template as well as the materials that we have here as well. Okay, so taking a look at a couple possible warm-ups. The first thing I want to talk about is this game called Name 5 Things. So similar to the game's categories, this is going to help learners name familiar, everyday items. So for example, you might say, name 5 animals that live on a farm. If you want to make this more challenging, you can add some variations to it. So for example, name 5 animals that live on a farm that are smaller than a car. So we're adding a little bit more information, kind of learners are able to really extract the information that they might have learned to play a game like this. Next we have something called Tic-Tac-Talk. Whoops. Okay, next we have something called Tic-Tac-Talk. So this is a simple WH question game. WH questions meaning those who, what, where, when, why. We are able to play this kind of like a tic-tac-toe board, but then you play this alongside who you are tutoring so that they can hear the questions as well as answer the questions. So for example, you'd be able to do something like, what did you eat for dinner yesterday? Who is someone you admire? Where was the last store you shopped at? And then when you answer a question, you can cross it off just like you would when you're playing tic-tac-toe. All right, and finally, the last suggestion I have for a warm-up is Wordle or connections. So this is going to heavily depend on your learner's comfortability and acquisition of English as an additional language that they are learning. If they are kind of at that level, some helpful websites that I have for this include the New York Times. They have a lot of different fun word games that are through a subscription, but we do also have a website called Wordle Unlimited, played exactly like the traditional New York Times game. However, you are able to play it many times with new words each time. All right, so let's take a look at one of the lessons that we have here at WALC. This is a grammar lesson for to be verbs. So every lesson that we do have here, all of the curriculum I write, does have a warm-up activity. So each lesson does have a warm-up activity, and that can act as background knowledge indicator and also an introduction to the objective of the current lesson. Additional warm-ups or icebreakers should be done prior to this. This is more of a warm-up for the lesson itself. When you're able to do those additional warm-ups in the beginning before you are really diving into the lesson, it allows for further engagement or a better understanding of the goals that you kind of create with your learners. So you're able to have those conversations, you're able to do those check-ins during that warm-up time. All right, so planning your learning objectives. So we always want to make sure that they are actionable. So what does the learner need to do specifically? All of our lessons that we provide here at WALC will have learning objectives for you. So this will make it very easy when you want to incorporate objectives into a lesson like grammar. So for example, this lesson, the learning objectives were to complete sentences using personal pronouns, complete sentence using the correct form of to be, change affirmative sentence to negative, so on and so forth. And the lesson is structured so that by the end of it, they should be able to complete all of these objectives. And if not, that's when we can kind of go to that last step I talked about, which was that assessment, and see what else can we do to kind of fill in those gaps if we're not really connecting to these objectives. All right, so effective lesson planning, something I always want everyone to keep in mind. Lessons should always be learner-centered, meaning what do they want to know about? What are their goals? These are things we definitely should know about when we are trying to do this. This should also be based on the learner and tutor goals together. This is something that you should be kind of making together as that relationship gets stronger and as you are able, as you're learning your students more. Okay, so as adult learners, we want to make sure also that our lessons are multi-sensory. So I want you to kind of keep in mind that we effectively intake 20% of what we hear, 40% of what we hear and see, and then 80% of what we do. So we do want to incorporate a lot more of those hands-on activities, because that is just what's going to stick in our brains better when we're actually using physical motion to learn these concepts as well. But overall, lessons should be organized but flexible. Always have a plan, but know that sometimes plans need to change. All right, so when presenting new materials, this is when we're going to talk about kind of that direct model versus that discovery model. The direct model is probably what most people are familiar and most comfortable with. That's kind of when you are raised in a traditional school setting, a direct model is very common for us. It's what we grew up knowing. So that's going to be, the tutor just presents the information and says the rule is. It's very teacher-centered. And like I said, we retain only 20% of what we hear. So we want them to be involved in the process as well. So we're going to take a look at this discovery model. So the tutor is going to give the information, and we're going to look at it with the mindset more of, can you see a pattern? Making it a little bit more learner-centered, and then we're going to be able to retain 80% of that, because it is something that we are actually doing rather than just telling. Okay, so discovery learning, what does that look like? So it could be something like just giving the sentences, like the Windex is on the table, the mop is in the closet, the rags are on the table, the gloves are in the closet. I can present this to a learner and say, what do you notice about this? What do you notice about these bolded words? And then we can have them try it out. The vacuum blank in the closet, the sponges blank in the closet. Based on what you see here, what should these answers be? Okay, and then when we want to do some more structured practice versus semi-structured practice, structured is going to have kind of like the answers for them to fill in. Having a vocabulary word bank is always really nice, because it's a way for them to see the words and plug them in easily. When we have more semi-structured, we still have a picture and we still have some sentence starters to kind of really engage that conversation, but it's going to be a little bit more open-ended. So for example, we have, where is the Dawn dish soap, for example? Where are the towels? We can use this to kind of show that grammar rule, because obviously in this lesson we're taking a look at the to be verb again, the difference between is and are. We can just tell the rule, this is how you do it, but when we use a more discovery model and when we kind of practice with that structured going into the semi-structured learning, it really just sticks better, because the adult learner is really in the process and they're kind of figuring out the rule for themselves. Okay, and then finally we want to build up to a little bit more free practice then. This is going to demonstrate authentic tasks. It allows for conversation practice, but also we can use it for role play if applicable. Okay, remember that practice is always scaffolded. Scaffolded meaning exactly like we see for construction scaffold. We want to make sure that we kind of present this new information, and that's going to be more of like the I do. The teacher is kind of telling you this stuff. Then we do a structured practice together. So then we do. The semi-structured, like I showed before, those more open-ended questions, that's going to be more of a you do. So the goal is going to be accuracy. And then finally, free practice is you do again, and the goal is fluency. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about the role of assessment in lesson planning. So we can do initial assessments. This This allows us to identify students' existing abilities and needs. We can also learn the student's background and goals. When we have kind of this base information and we're able to kind of reassess, it's going to build rapport and it's going to build trust. When we have that initial assessment, we can establish a baseline to measure progress, which is something that as teachers and tutors, we should always want to do, because how can we know where to go if we don't know where we are starting? Did want to mention that WALC, we do have a basic diagnostic assessment for tutors to use on our Google Drive. So feel free to use that if you are unsure of where your student is starting out at. But then ongoing evaluation, this is going to be used to measure and celebrate students' progress. So we want to evaluate these students' goals. What long-term goals do they have? What short-term goals? And then we can look and modify those as we go. And evaluation is for us as well. If things are not working, if a student is not progressing, it's one thing for us to kind of look at the learner, but then we can also look at ourselves. What new instructional approaches should I take if I'm not seeing the results that I want to see? Okay, so I wanted to just kind of emphasize that when you are planning a lesson, I showed kind of before the line so we can kind of see the progress, but it is a little bit more of a circle. So we want to be like setting a goal, kind of talking about where we want to go with this, planning and implementation of that. We're going to monitor, we're going to evaluate, we're going to adapt, and we're going to communicate that process. And that's something that as we learn, as we grow, we're going to do this over and over again. Okay, so final tips for our tutors. Number one, repetition, 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 especially for an adult brain. Some things need to be done many times in order for them to stick. So keep this in mind during lessons. Rather than trying to do many little things, try to focus on a couple like small targeted topics to help the learner leave with something tangible. If you are doing a lesson and you want to teach the to be verb, they at the end of the lesson will know about the to be verb. So those objectives can really help guide the lesson and keep you on track. So then I want us to focus on vocabulary and concepts. I know that studies show that someone needs to be able to use about 1,000 to 2,000 words in order to comfortably navigate in another language. So the faster you kind of front load this material and when students are able to authentically practice them, the better off their foundational skills will be established when we kind of front load this, this information. And then finally, understand their why. Why is the person that you're tutoring learning English? Are they looking for a job? Do they want to be able to better communicate with their kids' school? Are they intimidated and want to learn how to better navigate daily American life? This should drive your lessons and your instructions to understand what's the purpose. Why are they here? Why do they want this help? Okay, so now I'm going to play a video about the importance of confidentiality in adult education, and this comes to us from our wonderful partners at Wisconsin Literacy. So I'm going to play this video next.
Hello and welcome to the Importance of Confidentiality in Adult Education. This is a resource for staff and volunteers, instructors and tutors who work in adult literacy, ELL, and GED programs. My name is Jamie Cobes. I'm a tutor training and digital literacy project manager for Wisconsin Literacy. In this video, I'm going to cover the types of personal information that you want to keep confidential. I'll give you some examples of formal confidentiality agreements that your agency should have. We'll have 8 best practices for maintaining confidentiality, and I will end with scenarios to check your understanding. Confidential information is information that we think of as personal. It includes names, addresses, and telephone numbers, social security numbers, but also citizenship status or immigration status, level of education, financial information, including employment status or place of employment, any involvement with the justice system, marital status and sexual orientation, and medical information. This personal information could be information that you need to share internally on a need-to-know basis in order to best support your students or staff, but otherwise you want to keep this private. Most of the time we operate under an informal confidentiality agreement, meaning that information you share with students or that students share with you kind of comes with this unspoken agreement that will keep it confidential. But as an adult education agency, you really want to have formal confidentiality agreements in place. These could look like clauses in a volunteer or staff handbook, student intake forms, or norms that instructors and tutors set at the beginning of instruction. It's our hope that by watching this video, we can all start on the same page and acknowledge that confidentiality is an ethical responsibility that we have as adult educators, and that we're really doing it for our students, because guaranteeing adult students' privacy protects a safe learning environment. On the next slides, I've gathered 8 best practices for maintaining confidentiality. Best practice number 1. We want to remember that our students are adults who can make their own decisions, and one way to show our respect for our students is never to assume what they would want. So best practice number 1, you want to involve your students in your confidentiality decisions. Whenever possible, you want to be able to discuss with your students the next 7 best practices and what they would like. Best practice number 2, avoid referring to students by name or other identifying characteristics, such as where they work, live, etc., when you talk about them. You can share specifics about instruction, but for example, you would want to say, my student is having difficulty reading a manual from work. Not, my student John is having difficulty reading the assembly line manual at the Ford plant. This best practice includes when you're talking about your students to other students or to the public, but it might not include talking about your student to other staff in your agency who would need this personal information to best support that student. Best practice number 3, store documents with personal information in a secure location. Shred those paper documents when you don't need them anymore. This includes records such as learner files, tutoring reports, stories students write, but it can also include just a quickly jotted phone number of your student that you've left on a sticky note. So you want to make sure that you don't leave those on your desk, that you don't leave student documents at a photocopier. You also want to remember that there might be legal guidelines about how long agencies have to hold on to student files, so you might have to wait a while before shredding those documents. Best practice number 4. For in-person tutoring, make sure your public meeting place has options for privacy. Again, this is a conversation you want to have with a student beforehand. Maybe they're okay sitting out in the open in a public library, for example, but you do want to offer the option of a closed door space. Best practice number 5, for online tutoring, wear earbuds or headphones and/or work in a private space. This is especially important if you have other people in your home or work office that could overhear your students speaking. We want to be sure that the student can be confident knowing that nobody is listening to them. You might also consider, if you have other students or maybe library patrons working behind you in a computer lab or something like that, you might also consider blurring your background with your camera setting. Best practice number 6, ask for explicit written permission to take and use photos and videos of students. As part of your intake process, your agency should have already asked and recorded this answer. You just want to make sure to inquire with your staff whether your student gave permission before taking or sharing photos and videos of them. A safe practice might also be just to get in the habit of taking pictures of the back of students' heads or from the back of a classroom. Best practice number 7. When you see a student in the community, let them take the lead on acknowledging you. Many students will love running into you and saying hello, but other students will not want to acknowledge needing the help. Let your students say hi first, and then also take their lead on explaining how they know you or how you know each other. So if your student says, "I'll see you at school tomorrow," then refer to your agency as school. Our last best practice number 8, tell students clearly when and where you cannot guarantee confidentiality. This might be at large public events or settings or times when you know that the media will be present. It might also be because a student has a criminal background and you want to share that criminal record with a tutor or instructor to make sure that that tutor or instructor feels safe and supported. All right, we've come to the section of scenarios to check your understanding. So we'll have 5 scenarios. Each scenario will be paired with a recommended response. But before you get to that recommended response, I really encourage you to pause the video and reflect on your own response and try to answer these 2 questions in italics for each scenario. To what extent is the student's personal information at risk? And which best practices would you use to maintain the student's confidentiality? Scenario 1. You're a tutor and you run into a student at a community event. A friend asks, "How do you two know each other?" To what extent is the student's personal information at risk? And which best practices would you use to maintain confidentiality? Pause the video to reflect. Scenario 1, we want to remember that confidentiality preserves the dignity of adult students. This is a place where you want to let the student take the lead in explaining how you know each other, and whenever possible, when you first start instructing this student, you should discuss the scenario beforehand. So say, when we meet in public, when we run into each other at the grocery store, what should we say? What should we do? Scenario number 2, a student speaks at your program's volunteer recognition event. He's able to share how much his tutor has helped him and how much he's learned. And then a reporter asks to interview this student. To what extent is the student's personal information at risk? And which best practices would you use to maintain confidentiality? Pause the video to reflect. For scenario number 2, volunteer and donor recruitment efforts, things that all agencies need to do, can sometimes conflict with confidentiality agreements. So this is a situation where beforehand you would have wanted to let the student know that it might not be possible to guarantee his confidentiality, that there will be media present. It's also a scenario where you want to ask the student for permission to use their name, story, and photo, maybe before introducing them to the reporter. So whether you've told them before the event or before they meet the reporter, you want to make sure that they understand that their information will be publicized. Scenario number 3. As the instructor of a workplace English class, you want students to practice sharing about themselves, their names, their families, where they live, or where they are from. To what extent is the student's personal information at risk, and which best practices would you use to maintain confidentiality? Pause the video to reflect. In scenario number 3, we really want to remember that asking students to share personal information with peers or coworkers may break confidentiality. If this is a workplace English class, you want to check first with human resources about their policies. This could also be a scenario where you want to make sure to create class norms for maintaining privacy. So as the instructor, you start out class 1 by discussing what is it that we can share, what do we not share, and when things are shared, that they need to stay in this class. A workaround that one of our members did use in this actual scenario was to have students create alternate personas. Scenario number 4. Someone calls your agency to see if a student is present in your classes. To what extent is the student's personal information at risk, and which best practices would you use to maintain confidentiality? Pause the video to reflect. Scenario number 4 is really about remembering that confidentiality can keep our students safe. In the case of female students, it's important to remember as well that there is a statistical link between low literacy skills and abused women. In this scenario, you want to start out by asking students at the beginning, when you're offering services to them at the beginning, who has their permission to know that they are receiving your services. And that way you'll have a list of people that you can or cannot tell that they are present in your classes when they call. Our last scenario, scenario number 5. A student asks you, her tutor, for help installing an app on her smartphone. To what extent is the student's personal information at risk, and which best practices would you use to maintain confidentiality? Pause the video. In scenario number 5, we want to remember that students' personal devices like phones, tablets, laptops contain a lot of personal information. Not only is it a best practice for maintaining confidentiality, but it's a best practice for digital literacy instruction to have that student install the app herself with your verbal assistance. If you have to take possession of the device, make sure that you have the explicit permission of the student and that they watch as you install. So we've come to the end of this video, and I want to summarize. Confidentiality is important because it prevents misuse of personal information, either illegal or unethical use. It protects the reputation of the adult education agency. It builds trust and promotes students' confidence, and it protects students' dignity and safety. As much as we try, we know that this video can't be all-encompassing. So if after
Okay, so just to kind of wrap up here, taking a look at a couple different tutor expectations that we have for our tutors at WALC. Number 1, want to make sure that we have some communication going. So we want to make sure that we stay in contact with you kind of regarding the status of your learning pair. If you lose touch with your learner, please let us know. It's something that maybe we can reach out and just say, are you still interested in tutoring? Are you just kind of wanted to take a pause? That might be something that they want to share with us rather than with the tutor, which is okay. I think that's something we just want to make sure that everyone is comfortable. But yes, if you kind of lose touch, you can come to us and for support, and we kind of see what is going on there. And as far as tracking and materials, tutors, when they after they complete a session, we do have a tutor log. This really helps us kind of track our impact with who we are serving in the community, and this is going to be a Google form that will be sent to you by our volunteer coordinator. So these are due at the end of every month. Also, we have plenty of materials for tutors to use. We can sign out any books or materials, but then please return them when you are done with them. And if you have any questions, you can always ask me about that as well. Okay, so different ideas for tutoring for if you are bringing a bag. So for example, I like to always bring a bag with me that has everything I need, and I never really take anything out of it, so I always make sure I'm prepared, but then that is my tutoring bag. Some things that I might have in there are whiteboards and markers, some different manipulatives or realia for your lesson. So this could be like Scrabble tiles, this could be flashcards, this could be photos, these could be vocabulary words with pictures. I also like to bring a computer. I like to show a lot of PowerPoints and all of the lessons that we provide here at WALC. If you are looking at our digital curriculum, do include PowerPoints as well, so I like to bring that. But you could also bring like a tablet or maybe your phone, just to have a little bit more of that digital element incorporated into your lesson. I like to bring a notepad and pen, maybe a textbook, a workbook, or a lesson plan folder. Please note any of these materials as well. The Winnebago Area Literacy Council can provide many of these with ample notice, so please feel free to ask if you are in need of any materials. Okay. So please feel free to email me with any questions that you have. My email address I can share with this video. But yeah, if you have any questions about tutoring or tutoring with us, please feel free to let us know. But thank you again. I am Emma Iden from the Winnebago Area Literacy Council. Thank you so much.